folks who will be watching later. And yeah, if you want to start with just a quick intro, and then folks can start coming up with questions. And if we need time to warm up, I'll start reading the questions off the sheet.
Sure. So I don't actually know too much about what's been discussed. I haven't seen the questions, but I accepted the invitation because I was heard kind of it about sort of exploring research, right? And my background is, I think, non-traditional. So I studied poetry as an undergraduate. I come from a family of more artists, and I hated science. And I took one undergraduate science class for non-majors, and I got a D-. It was my lowest grade in college. And I know people, I sometimes tell that to my Bio 1 students. They're like, what are you doing teaching us here? Who gave you permission? And I love science now. And I think part of it was I didn't appreciate kind of the nature of it and what, first of all, I'm a creative person, so I didn't appreciate how much research, how much creativity, what a huge part that is, right? In my little bit of experience with science classes, I wasn't getting that kind of sense of wonder and mystery that kind of gets you hooked on things. Same thing, just like a good book, right? You know, I hear people describe it as, you know, if you're a scientific researcher, it's the unknown, not the known, that gets you excited, right? So I like that. And yeah, and I think, and there's, you know, my big part of my job is just to discover things, which is pretty cool, right? So it's this kind of exploratory process. The other thing I do here at UF is I've worked, because of my interest in those other things, and I think the importance, I actually teach a class in an art studio. I co-teach a class called Studio Lab, where it's half scientists, half artists. And the scientists and artists get together in similar goals as this class in some respects, probably. And they have to come up with a project, test it, defend it, and that combines science and art. And so it's purposely open-ended. And it may sound cool, but it's really tough, right? Because you tell someone, go out and do something really cool. And then at the end, we have these science art teams present their works in a formal gallery, an exhibit. We have an opening complete with finger food and everything. And I think people get a real appreciation for, I don't know, the kind of challenges and processes of coming up with ideas, which is a big part of research that we, as scientists, I think we almost think about as metaphysical, right? That you wait for the aha moment. You know, the art students have a whole class on just coming up with ideas. It's very well refined, and trying and failing and looking at things from different perspectives. So that's my way of pushing research and exploration. So I'm into it, yeah.
Awesome. So I don't see any hands up yet, so maybe we can jump to a question from the sheet. I think Jake Yakub asked an interesting question about how do you approach a research question in your own work?
I mean, most of my science, so virtually everything I do, I collaborate, because I just feel like it makes things better, and it's impossible to have enough knowledge sometimes you're working across things. Most of my work is kind of what you call macro biology or big picture biology. So it often involves looking for real broad patterns that might be processes, they might be structures that apply across this huge diversity of organisms, and then trying to explain those with some like ridiculously simple kind of mathematical model or biophysical model. So I've always liked this kind of idea of, despite all the complexity and diversity, to look for unifying principles or themes or phenomena in organisms. So sometimes it's a pattern, or sometimes it's an intuition of a pattern. And I actually, like, I couldn't operate a pipette if my life depended on it. And I'm a official biologist, right? Most of my work, because of the scale, because it involves all kinds of different organisms, from crickets to whales to tomato plants, I can't do in a lab. So I rely on previously published data, and I collect it and develop the kind of mathematical theory to hopefully explain it.
So Mikhail has a question.
Yes. I wanted to ask, based on your English literature background, do you think that served in any way as an advantage to your research nowadays? And do you have any regrets switching or shifting focus?
No, it's a really good question, Mikhail. I have zero regrets. And as much as I love science and education, I was just got off another appointment, and it bums me out that we're, I think, losing an appreciation for the arts and humanities. I think it's just invaluable in terms of our education and in intangible ways. I think it helped me because I didn't grow up in the same paradigms as everyone else, right? So, you know, if we all grow up with the same explanation and have taken all the same classes, and that's not great for discovery, right? You want people coming at it from different angles. I think you learn, you know, I wrote a lot of papers as an undergrad, and you learn how to make arguments, make a case, right? You know, writing is really a way of thinking, right? It's kind of a logical thing. And I think you develop that, which is a big part. I think you also learn just communicating and empathy and appreciating different perspectives. So yeah, I think there's tremendous value, and I think a lot of it's intangible, but I wish there was more of it. I'm a big believer in the kind of broad education thing.
On kind of a related note, Philip, who I believe is a biology major in our class, asks if your English background affects the way you approach scientific papers when you're writing in the sciences.
Yeah, so I'm real cognizant of the importance of, you know, a scientific result is not a scientific paper. That just like anything, you have to develop a story and a narrative, right? And that's how people learn, and you have to work to make it interesting and to, there's a storytelling in science, just like anything. You know, if I tell you, oh, I read this great book, The Boat Sinks, you'd say, oh, that sounds great. Yeah, maybe I'll read that one. But if I say, you know, and say it's the Titanic, or if I say this happens and then the boat sinks, then it's cool, right? And so that, I think, is a big part of it's developing a narrative. I teach a class on it every year in Chile, except for this year. And students go down there to science communication. They think I'm gonna like do verb sentences or what is it, sentence diagrams. And it's really all about telling a story, right?
So Ariana asks regarding the, so we read the article piece that you sent me about the your equation, and she wanted to know what the most surprising application of your ecological equation has been.
Good question, Ariana. I mean, honestly, I don't know all the ways it's been used. There's been some weird stuff. There was a guy who wrote a book on like planets and the organism. He had some theory on planets that used it. There's been people who have looked at anthropological questions, hunter-gatherer societies, and made arguments there, which I don't even know really what they are. Cancer was a cool one. It's been used to look at rates of tumor growth in cancer dynamics. Yeah, I don't, which I take no credit for, right? Like that's not my work, but it's been used in a lot of different stuff.
So Ruben had a couple of good questions. I noticed Ruben's actually here though. So Ruben, do you want to ask your questions?
Hi, Ruben.
Hey, sorry. I can try and find him here. Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to know what initially intrigued you about the field of science and particularly biology. And then what advice would you give younger students who are looking to enter the field of science? And what are some potential careers that you think will grow to be more critical in the future? Thank you.
You're welcome. Good questions. I think I got interested in science partly just because I liked kind of natural history and being outside, right? I didn't meet a scientist until I was 25, I think. So it wasn't even on my plate of possible careers. That was part of it. So, you know, meeting someone like, wow, you can actually like explore this stuff and that can be a job. That's pretty cool. So I think it just fit with me there. In terms of kind of general advice, I think my most general piece of advice would be, especially at a large university like this, is in your own way, whether it's quieter or not, to be more proactive, right? To have kind of an entrepreneurial spirit to your undergraduate education. And, you know, there's a zillion opportunities. I mean, you know, there's hundreds of research jobs right now available on campus, labs. Every lab I know has undergraduates working in it. There are probably a zillion labs that would love to have any one of you. But 99% of those jobs are never advertised. And so you have to go out looking for them, right? And that's kind of what I mean by the entrepreneurial spirit. And it's literally writing notes, getting rejected, realizing it's not personal, and keep writing another note. And I've seen students do undergraduate year level, do cool research in the Amazon, in China, whatever, all expense paid. But there's one thing that holds students back is the same feeling we all have at these kind of beginning levels is, oh my God, what could I possibly contribute to some Amazon expedition? Or, oh my God, what could I continue with, you know, I've only taken, and my belief is, yes, you can contribute. And if you think, you know, there's a switch there's gonna be no switch after you take advanced genetics or suddenly you can do science. And that's the biggest thing, is just to go after it and try things and reach out and not just go into this thing where you're kind of taking your classes. And it's hard to do, but taking your classes and taking your exams and waiting for things. And the other thing I think that helps with is exploring what's the best fit for you, right? And kind of what works best for you. I mean, it took me forever. Like, I don't even like to say, they talk about, what are they, gap year, like that's like slacker year. Well, I took 6 slacker years, but I wasn't slacking, you know, I was doing stuff, right? I was learning a ton. So in terms of careers, I think it's a mix, you know, I think part of it is what you're good at. I think in what interests you, I think that's where you're going to make a contribution. I think there's always room for good people in any area. And, you know, there's just, I mean, new areas are emerging all the time. And I think there's probably also multiple careers that would fit all of us really well, right? I mean, there's huge things in biomedical stuff. There's huge things in ecology and environmental science, huge changes now in kind of genetics and evolutionary science, in disease and epidemiology. Yeah, so I think part of it is be entrepreneurial and explore, right? And to see kind of make those experiences happen.
Guys, don't forget, you can use the chat if you're embarrassed to speak up and ask your question. But to go to another one from the sheet, several students had questions about things you did early in your research career. Ali Hussein asks about your experience working at Dr. Brown's lab at the University of Mexico. How did working with an interdisciplinary group of scientists and researchers from various backgrounds propel your own research?
Ooh, that's cool. So I think, there's a lot of discovery that lies at kind of the intersection between disciplines. And nowadays, we're getting this just flooded with new technology and new tools. And you might think that that makes us inherently more interdisciplinary. And I think a lot of times it's the opposite, because we kind of dig deeper and deeper and deeper into our own little silos, right? And so to work across disciplines, you have to get different people. And there's a couple of things that helps with that. One is having just enough basic knowledge in these areas so you can talk to each other. Like, I'm no great mathematician, but I know enough where I can talk with a mathematician, right? And have them do the real hard parts. But it's a real challenge because there's a huge just human dynamic and trust component working with people in different disciplines, right? And listening and teaching each other and kind of being vulnerable. I remember I started that postdoc job in Dr. Brown's lab, and we had a meeting. It was with some world famous physicist, and we're in this old room. And I remember thinking, like, oh my God, what am I doing here? This is Greek. Like, I don't know what they are talking about, right? And then what I learned is he was a world-class physicist, but he didn't know I could teach him something about biology, right? And we learned to kind of trust each other. And I love the interdisciplinary stuff. I find it so exciting if you can find the time to do that and also have kind of a sincere mutual interest in the problem at hand. I mean, to me, that's where magic happens,
So that answer kind of touched on this, but Camellia asked specifically, what are the challenges, the biggest challenges of trying to communicate with other branches of science?
Well, there's a lot. One is sometimes you just don't speak the same language, right? Sometimes you don't even have a basic knowledge of each other's disciplines where you can it's like you're different languages. Where you can't even appreciate the importance or the perspective that they bring to the table. Sometimes you don't find the same things interesting, or it takes more time because you kind of have to learn from each other. And, I think big part of it is finding access to those people. We tend to still break up into little groups. You're either genetics or you're ecology or you're whatever. And, like when I go to biology seminar, I don't care if it's genetics or ecology or whatever. If it's a cool story, I'm into it. And I think we need more of that kind of interdisciplinary training.
So Jonathan Lewis asks, how many hours out of the day do you spend thinking about your research? And who's your favorite author and why?
Woo. It depends in terms of how many days or how many hours a day. I mean, I love it. It varies. So right now I'm teaching Bio 1, so I have 1,100 students. So it's kind of intense, and I'm not getting a whole lot of research done. But normally it's a big part of my job. And, I'd say most days when I'm not teaching like an intense class like this, I would say the better part of a day is spent on research, right? It's kind of the most important thing of our, and my favorite author and why. I don't know if I have a favorite author. I always switch. I'm trying to think who like, oh, that's a really good question. I have to look at my bookshelf. I mean, for biology stuff, I still like some of the like lighter public, you know, like late at night, I don't read a physics textbook. I like the kind of lighter stuff, you know, like I'd much rather pick a Discovery magazine or whatever. I like E.O. Wilson is a biologist that's done that. I find his writing really nice, and he's written a lot of like public science books. I've been reading for partly just for class. There's an evolutionary biologist called Sean Carroll, who's another kind of like a popular science guy, does a lot of HHMI videos, which I've been reading mostly just for my own, for being a teacher. Yeah, those two names, I guess.
Mikhail has another question.
Yes, yes. Okay, so going back to the concept of entrepreneurship in the field of biology or any other field of science, how does a undergraduate student initiate that sense of an entrepreneurship? And like, for example, I see that you have a lot of representative publications, right? How does one get involved with publications or internships or other things at a high level?
So that's a good question, right? And I mean, there is a Center for Undergraduate Center for Undergraduate Research, and there are some programs, but I think a lot of it is, I mean, my Bio 1 students, what I tell them to do is, you know, every department has, all the research faculty have web pages, right, that describe their research. You can go through those web pages. Some of them will have, like, if you're interested, do this or that. But most of them, what you do is you write a little, you write them a little email. And I tell them about, find 10 of those people. And, you know, it can be ecology, it can be wildlife ecology, it can be psychology, it can be the Brain Institute. And you write 10, and what you do is, you know, they don't want your life story, just 3 or 4 sentences, but but still personalize it a little bit, right? If I get a, dear doctor, I love your research, can I work in your lab? I delete it. But if I get, dear doctor, your research on whatever sounds really interesting, I'm wondering if you might have any opportunities. And if so, is there a chance I could maybe set up an appointment by phone or something, right? Send out 10 of those. And you don't have to pretend to be an expert. Often they prefer students in the first or second year. And you send out 10. If they don't answer, you wait a week and you send them the message again. They're not responding. They're not saying, oh my God, Mikhail, I can't believe he contacted me. He's totally unqualified for this research. It's just they're overloaded with email. So they don't take that personally. And then if those 10 don't respond next week, you send out another batch. And I guarantee you find a research position that way. It's a foolproof method, but it takes a little work, right? And a big part of it, again, is just being willing to, you know what they're looking for, whether it's cancer research or the study of elk or this, they're generally looking for the same things you might do if you got a job at Taco Bell. Hate to say it, but they're looking for people who are going to be reliable, who are hardworking, who are curious, who want to learn, right? And those are the biggest things. And we're going to kind of contribute in some positive way to the dynamic. I've published papers in international journals with undergraduate students from UF. And you know how they started? They started with that little note to me. And then they started working and they spent 2 or 3 years in the lab. And by the end, they had their own project and I was a co-author. That's how it happens. But you see, that's the entrepreneurial, right? That's like going, no one's gonna come and knock on your door and say, Mikhail, I got the perfect opportunity for you. You know?
Really glad to hear you say this stuff, because this is kind of exactly what we've been talking about in the class. So it's good reinforcement of some things. Cynthia has a question.
Yeah, so I guess in the class we've talked about submitting research emails and usually attaching like a resume. And I was curious if you had any like input or advice, like how to approach that, because I imagine it's different than just like any regular job. So if you're applying for a research position, maybe important things to include to present yourself and show off your best qualities.
Yeah, that's a good question, Cynthia. I don't think there's any one way to do it, right? I think, maybe if you put a little reverse psychology, if you read your little blurb, think about your goal is to get them to want to talk with you on the phone or invite you in to talk about it further, right? They're not making a decision with that email. So you just want to pique their interest a little bit. So, if it's cancer research and you say, I actually did cancer research in high school, or if it's this, you say, I just found what you read, and you don't have to claim any expertise, or I'm interested in this because I've always found it interesting how, that's the biggest part, right? They won't even get to the resume often. And, I think you want to be eager and enthusiastic, that, you're willing to work, but I don't think there's any magical thing. I don't think you have to apologize for your level. And then the next step would be they invite you in, right? And for an interview, and I get the students like write me like, oh my God, dude, I got an interview. Like, what should I wear? Clean shirt. But what is that about? Well, then I would suggest to students that you look at their webpage a little bit more, right? Maybe try to read the abstracts of a couple recent papers, get a little better idea of what you do, what they do, and come with a couple of questions in your back pocket about whatever, what you're worried about, it can be logistical or scientific. They don't have to be brainiac questions. But there's a moment when you say, do you have any questions? And if someone says no, it just doesn't come off real well, right? As a curious person. And you don't have to script them, but say something. Yeah, I think and I think you'll find it's casual. Some labs will want more of a time commitment, some less, some will be looser, some will be more. Some have philosophies in terms of how they want to integrate undergraduates in the lab, some less. And part of it too is kind of, ideally you get a couple of opportunities because you can decide then what feels better with me. Like, oh, him or her just seemed like a better fit for me. Yeah, that's it, I think. But I think, you'd be amazed if if we could all magically like fluoresce every lab right now that would accept an undergraduate researcher, everything. And you just got to start digging.
Awesome. We could do maybe one more question if anybody has one they want to wrap up with.
Rachel, Angel, come on. I see your faces.
I can go.
All right, yeah.
I had a question about like how you got involved with Dr. Brown's lab at the University of New Mexico, just because I feel like that's so disconnected from where you were, like according to the magazine and everything. How did you find that opportunity?
Oh, some of it's just dumb luck, and some of it is going after things. So he was visiting the University of Wisconsin. I was a grad student, and the people I was working on this stuff, and the people on my committee they weren't really into it. They didn't really understand like why anyone would care or be interested, right? And Dr. Brown was into this big picture biology, and he came to the University of Wisconsin and to give a talk. And I went to the professor hosting him and I said, I need to meet with this guy. You got to put me on a schedule. Like, I need to talk to him quick. And not for a job, just because like I thought, oh my God, there's someone I can finally, right? And he said, his schedule's full. He doesn't have time. And I said, please ask him. And so Dr. Brown said to him, he said, he wants to meet? Fine, I'll meet him at 6 in the damn morning. He goes, and he said, if he's up for it, we met at, I said, I'm there, see you at 6. And we just hit it off. And we talked for 2 hours. And shortly after that, I got an interview. And he called me 10 minutes before my PhD defense. The interview was like the week before. I flew out to California. And he's like, well, it's going to be 6 weeks before we decide or whatever. And he called me 10 minutes before I was walking in for my PhD defense. He said, Jamie, go kick some ass. You got the job. And I was just like, oh. So I walked into my PhD defense and said, well, I'm happy to report I'll be working with Dr. Brown. You know, kind of made the defense easy. Yeah, it's random, right? There's a human dimension too. And I'm still in touch with him all the time. He's still like, he's older now. He loves science so much. He'll write me an email and he'll say, Jamie, I haven't talked to you in a while. I think it'd be fun to catch up. And I write back, sure, Jim. And then he calls me and he's like, hi, how are you? And I'm like, good. And he's like, okay, great. So this is what I'm thinking. And he goes off on some crazy science hypothesis. Like, he doesn't care how I am. He just wants to talk science. It's kind of cool, right? Like, he has this infectious curiosity that I just love.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Gillooly. This has been great. Is it Gillooly? Am I saying it right?
Yeah, that's pretty good, actually.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a hard time with some folks' names.
No worries.
Anyway, thanks so much. We really appreciate your time and your.
My pleasure. And if
wisdom.
anything, you have some dying question that occurs to you, feel free to contact me and I'll be glad to try to answer it. Huh? Good luck, everyone. Go get those research positions, right? All right, cool. Have a good one, huh?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a good one.